Hello, and welcome back to MysHistory. I'm Rhonda, and this is where I will talk about odd or unsolved historical mysteries. If that sounds like something that you might be interested in, then please consider subscribing. So last week, we talked about the strange case of D.B. Cooper, the guy that got away with $200,000 back in 1971 and then disappeared into the night over the wilderness of southwestern Washington and was never seen again. That guy. Had one comment that said that he saw in a documentary D.B. Cooper was eaten by Bigfoot. This week, I will be discussing a case that I came across when I was looking for topics to put on this channel, and it was also recommended in the comments of my last video. Let's talk about the unsolved case of Somerton Man. This case is from December 1st, 1948 in Australia, where an unidentified man was found dead on Somerton Beach. Somerton Beach is in Adelaide. He was found by two trainee jockeys who were out exercising their horses. No one knew how he died or who he was. He was dressed in a double-breasted suit. He wore polished shoes. His hair was well groomed. There was an unsmoked cigarette resting on his chest. His head was slumped against the wall, and it was initially thought that he had died as a result of either heart failure or poisoning. An autopsy showed the man to be very fit, between the ages of 40 and 45, and possibly an athlete, as he appeared to be in top physical condition. There were no traces of poison. There was no identification, and oddly, all of the tags in all of his clothing had been cut out. Fingerprints taken of the man were of no help in his identification, and as such, the authorities took a picture of him and posted it in the newspaper. Unfortunately, no one was able to identify the man, or if they were, nobody bothered to come forward. 4 months after the body was discovered, authorities found a hidden pocket sewn inside of the trousers, and inside that pocket was a rolled up piece of paper from a rare book called Rubaiyat, and the words Tamam Shud, which is Farsi for "it is ended." After searching for that exact copy of the book, which was specifically from 1941, police decided to go ahead and bury the Somerton man without identification, but not before taking a cast of him and embalming him for preservation. 8 months after the body was discovered, a man walked into the police station claiming that just after the body was found, he found a copy of Rubaiyat in the back of his car. He usually kept it parked near the beach, and his windows were down. And he simply dismissed that book until he read about the search for the man's identity in the newspaper. Initially, the man's brother is the one that noticed the copy, and each man thought that that copy of the book belonged to the other, so the car owner just placed it in his glove box and simply forgot about it. He produced the book to the police department, and they noted that the final page that was torn from it matched the piece of paper found on the man at Somerton Beach. Also discovered inside the book were a phone number and a strange code. The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam was a translated copy of verse by an 11th century Persian poet, and it was popular in the West in the 1940s. The phone number would lead investigators to a woman by the name of Jessica Thompson. It is stated that she was very evasive during her interview, and then she claimed that she was about to faint when she saw the bust of the man at Somerton Beach, while the whole time denying that she knew who he was. Her denial never sat well with investigators, and they would learn from neighbors that the night before the Somerton man was found, a strange man was knocking on her door. Ms. Thompson lived 400 meters away from where the body was discovered, and she was a former nurse in Sydney before moving to Adelaide. She did admit to selling a copy of Rubaiyat to a man named Alfred Boxall. Investigators followed up on that to learn that Mr. Boxall was very much alive, and he had his intact copy of the book. As for the code found with the phone number, code crackers from both the FBI and Scotland Yard were unable to decode the message. The theory at that time, given that the man was in good physical condition, the secret code, potential undetected poisoning, and the fact that no one could identify him, was that the man was a Russian spy. This was, after all, right at the beginning of the Cold War, and the Red Scare was everywhere. The night before the body was found, November 30th, a husband and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Lyons, were out for a walk on the beach at around 7 p.m. They noticed a well-dressed man lying in the sand with his head propped against the seawall. They said he was lying there with his legs outstretched and his feet crossed, and that he extended his right arm upward and then let it fall to the ground. The husband thought that perhaps the man was drunk and was attempting to smoke a cigarette. About a half hour later, another couple saw the same man lying in the same position. They were above the seawall looking down toward the beach and thought that he was oddly dressed to be laying on the beach. According to them, he was motionless and there was a swarm of mosquitoes around his face, which led the boyfriend to jokingly say he must be dead to the world to not notice them. Ooh. The next morning, as Mr. Lyons was returning from a morning swim, he noted a large group of people around the area of the seawall where he and his wife had seen the man the night before. The man, against the wall, was in the same position that he had been the previous evening, but it was obvious that he was deceased. At the Royal Adelaide Hospital, Dr. Bennett placed the time of death as not earlier than 2 a.m. on December 1st. He noted the likely cause as heart failure. The only contents found on the man at the time were tickets from Adelaide to the beach, a pack of gum, matches, 2 combs, and a pack of Army Club cigarettes with 7 cigarettes of another more expensive brand, Cansitas. At the full autopsy, it was noted that the man's pupils were smaller than normal and looked unusual. A dribble of spittle had run down the side of the man's mouth. His spleen was strikingly large and firm, about 3 times normal size. His liver was distended with congested blood. His stomach showed remains of his last meal, a pasty, and also contained blood. This suggested poisoning, but there was nothing showing that it was in the food. Further tests on the blood and organs by an expert chemist didn't show even the slightest trace of poison, which was astounding. Another chemist at an inquisition considered that a rare poison that would leave the body soon after death may have been used, either digitalis or strophanthin. I think that's how you say that. Heavily suspecting the latter. This is a rare glycoside that comes from the seeds of some African plants and was historically used by Somali tribes to poison arrows. By January 11th, 1949, investigators had exhausted every lead they had and widened the investigation to attempt to locate any abandoned personal possessions, such as luggage, thinking that perhaps the man was from out of state. They checked every hotel, dry cleaner, lost property office, and railway station within miles, which would lead the detectives to being sent to the main railway station in Adelaide on January 12th. There, they were shown a brown suitcase that had been left in a cloakroom on November 30th, 1948. Nothing was remembered about the owner, and the contents were not any help either. In the suitcase was an orange reel of thread, which matched thread that was used to patch the dead man's trousers. There were no stickers on the suitcase. A label had been torn off from one side. All of the tags were missing from all but 3 items of clothing, which bore the name Keene or T. Keene, but it was impossible to trace anyone with that name, which then led investigators to believe that they had been left on the clothing intentionally, knowing that that was not the man's name. Also in the suitcase was a stencil kit, typically used by a third officer on merchant ships to stencil cargo, a table knife with the heft cut down, and a coat stitched using a feather stitch, which was unknown in Australia. This would be identified by an Australian tailor as a stitch used in America, thus then suggesting that the coat had traveled possibly during the war years. Searches of shipping and immigration records from across the country produced no leads. This case has had amateur sleuths trying to solve the case in recent years, often bringing some things to conclusion while simultaneously creating more questions. Investigator Jerry Feltis and Professor Derek Abbott have made some progress. While they admit that they haven't solved the mystery of the man of the beach, they continue to work. It has been assumed that Jessica may very well have known the man due to her reaction to seeing the bust of him. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2007. It is wondered if solution might be found in her activities during the Second World War, and the possibility that she gave copies of Rubaiyat to men with whom she had relations. According to Mr. Abbott, Jessica had a son who would have been 16 months old at the time of the visit from the Somerton Man, who shows some similarities to the unidentified man. Is it possible that he could have been the son of Jessica and this unidentified man, and he killed himself when she denied access to see her and her son? This theory has produced doubt in that why would a man commit suicide by dosing himself with a rare poison? Both digitalis and strophanthin are found at pharmacies and not over the counter, and they're typically used to treat heart disease. And remember, Jessica used to be a nurse. Had to take a quick break. It's hot. As I said earlier, it's thought that perhaps the unidentified man was a spy. The nature of his death would suggest this. It turns out that Alfred Boxall, remember him? He worked intelligence during the war. The Somerton Man died at the onset of the Cold War at a time when there was a British rocket testing facility in Woomera. I'm sorry, Australia, if I pronounced that incorrectly. And that was only a few hundred miles away from Adelaide. It has been suggested that perhaps if he was poisoned, it was laced in the Somerton Man's cigarettes, which would explain why he had 7 different cigarettes in his pack. Adding to the mystery is the Rubaiyat itself. Mr. Feltis was able to track down a near identical copy of the book with the same cover, published by a New Zealand bookstore, Whitcomb and Toombs. This was more of a square format, and it was printed in a different font than that found near the Somerton Man. Even more mysterious, Mr. Abbott learned that at least one other man in Australia died after the war with a copy of the Rubaiyat close by. This man was George Marshall, not Michael, Marshall, and he happened to be a Jewish immigrant from Singapore. His copy of the book was published in London by Methuen and was a 7th edition. Inquiries to both the publisher and libraries worldwide suggested that there were no more than 5 editions of the Rubaiyat, meaning that the 7th edition found near Mr. Marshall and the edition found near the Somerton Man were in essence non-existent, leading to the question of whether or not they were books or some sort of disguised spy gear like a one-time code pad. While poring over the files, Mr. Feltis located a piece of evidence that no one seemed to follow up on. It was a statement from 1959 given by a man who claimed that he had been at Somerton Beach the evening before the discovery of the Somerton Man. He stated that he saw one man carrying another man on his shoulders near the water's edge. It was further reported that he could not describe the man, and the witness figured that what he had seen was one friend carrying another drunken friend, which seemed plausible. Given what happened, it does create more questions. None of the other witnesses said that they saw anybody else near the other man or even in the vicinity. So, could this suggest that this was a case with spies and murder? One other recent theory is that the man may have died from positional asphyxia, wherein someone passes out in an awkward position that then cuts off the breathing. Strange? Yes. Has it happened? Also, yes. There is a 2010 case printed in a forensic journal of a man who died after falling asleep inside of 3 truck tires. So now we get to where we are today, some 70 years later. So you remember the autopsy report saying that the man had been in excellent shape? It was further noted that his calf muscles were high and very well developed, while his toes were oddly wedge-shaped, giving the theory that the man was a ballet dancer. Also, keep in mind that Somerton Man was missing his outer incisor teeth, a genetic trait that left his canine teeth closer to his inner incisors. Remember Jessica the nurse and the fact that she had a son? She named her son Robin. He would go on to be a ballet dancer. He had the same genetic trait in his teeth as the Somerton Man. Unfortunately, Robin passed away in 2009. He was married to a woman named Roma. They had a daughter named Rachel, who was given up for adoption and later reconnected with her birth mother. Keeping up? Yeah, it's a lot. So, Derek Abbott dove down this lead and was able to locate both Roma and her daughter Rachel. When Mr. Abbott presented a photo of the Somerton Man to Roma, he asked if she knew anybody that might resemble him, and she said her ex-husband Robin did. Mr. Abbott then compared DNA from Rachel and her mother Roma to identify which part of her genome came from her father, and then ran those segments through a massive DNA database. Think Ancestry.com. It turns out Rachel's paternal link traces back to the mid-Atlantic states of the U.S., mostly around Virginia. Remember the coat with the feather stitching? This has recently been presented by a forensic scientist, Colleen Fitzpatrick, who is also working with Mr. Abbott. Mr. Abbott now believed that Rachel, who's his wife now, is the granddaughter of the Somerton Man, but he needed DNA evidence to prove it. Twice he petitioned the South Australian government to exhume the body of the Somerton Man, and twice he was denied. In an amazing twist, however, he was able to locate 3 hairs on the plaster cast of the Somerton Man, with the roots still attached. He gave these hairs to another professor to extract DNA from, and petitioned the government yet again for a 3rd time to exhume the body of Somerton Man. On May 19th, 2021, the body of Somerton Man was exhumed. While they aren't likely to find a cause of death, they are hopeful to at the very least be able to identify him. So, that's a lot. Again, a 70-year-old case, unsolved. Who was the Somerton Man? We should probably kind of keep up on this and maybe let each other know. And maybe I can do a follow-up if they ever figure out who he is. Probably won't know how he died. But I don't know. Given kind of the weird circumstances around his death and the fact that that Jessica woman lived 400 meters from the beach, and she was a nurse, and they think it could have been Digitalis or that other medication that I can't pronounce. I'm just saying. Have you heard of this case? Do you have any theories about what happened to the Somerton Man? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and click the bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video, which is usually going to be Tuesdays and Thursdays. Until next time, be safe. I'll see you soon. Bye.